welcome back to Spotlights. It's the podcast for the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. As usual, I'm your host, Tam Mickey, and this week I'm excited, very excited to welcome onto the show Osprey Orielle Lake. Osprey, thank you for being here.
It's an honor to be with you. Thank you.
For folks who might not know you, there's this wonderful book, The Story is in Our Bones, which I happen to have a copy of right here, which is about how worldviews and climate justice can remake a world in crisis. But also, you're the founder and executive director of Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, which is such a great acronym, We Can. And so I don't know how you came up with that. We'll need to talk about that. But first and foremost, I want to hear a little bit about how you got into this work because, as somebody, for instance, climate justice, this is something very near and dear to my heart. But I know a lot of people, if they think about climate change, they might want to be a climate scientist. Or if they think about justice, they might think of social justice. And so you're in that intersection that is exactly what the Forum on Religion and Ecology is about, where worldviews, values, ethics, justice intersect with nature, environment, climate. So how did you get into it? I'm always curious about people's origin story, and that could be as long a story as you want. You could be like, well, when I was 2 years old, sometimes it starts real early, sometimes it starts later, but I always love hearing people's story.
Well, thank you. It's a wonderful story. And yeah, that would be like several days. So I'm going to give you a shorter version of that.
Right.
But yeah, I love how you framed the question. And I think that I would say that for all my life, I've been very much in love with nature and the natural world, which I think many of us are, especially from our youth, if we're allowed to have space to be on the land in any capacity.
Yeah.
And early on, I really began to think about how humans were interacting with nature because I grew up in the town of Mendocino.
Oh,
For those of you who don't know, it's a small coastal town about 4 hours north of San Francisco. And at the time, of course, as a young person, I didn't know how wonderful it was to be there in
right.
this beautiful town, being on the ocean, and of course, the redwood trees that are up in that region. And early on, one of the places I loved to go hiking a little bit north of Mendocino was clear cut. The redwoods
Oh,
were clear cut.
wow.
And that was my first introduction to maybe not everything is as it should be,
Right.
and in this human nature relationship. I mean, I didn't have all the words or the language or the understanding, but it did break my heart.
Yeah.
And it was like these trees I had spent a lot of time with were no longer there.
Wow.
And so that grief and that questioning began early on.
Mm,
So fast forward many iterations of different things that I've done. But as I began on my environmental journey, so to speak, it brought me to the question of, well, this is a human activity, and why are we thinking this way? What are our worldviews, our values, as you mentioned earlier, that would lead us to be so destructive
right.
to the places that we love and to nature? And I did, all my university work through my undergraduate studies into my master's were all around this relationship between human and natures in many, many different ways.
Hmm.
And then, again, just sort of skipping pieces, but when in about 2009, when the Obama administration was coming in, first administration, there was a big conference in Copenhagen about climate. It was, the annual UN climate conferences.
Right.
And a lot of us, I was already working in the environmental field, a lot of us thought, well, there's an opportunity for something really to be done on climate with this new administration. And that did not happen.
Right.
And so I was actually walking in the redwood forest, which is where I often go to think. I consider them important teachers of mine. And I was in an old growth forest. And that feeling, I go there to be in alignment and to listen and to contemplate, was completely interrupted by this horrible sinking feeling
Mm,
that almost like a screaming. And I pretty much stopped everything I was doing and started really researching climate at a deeper level. And I found a lot of research about how there is a gender component in the sense of women's leadership and their one being I should back up. It's the fact that women are most negatively impacted by climate change due
Right.
to gender inequality around the world.
Right.
Women not knowing how to swim, certain countries you can't even drive. Just the fact of the issues around governance itself. And that led me to understand that there was, a disproportionate impact. And then, of course, as I dug into that more, there's a racial impact of Indigenous, Black, and Brown people being impacted because they're in sacrifice zones to where a lot of the harms are done that then lead to the climate crisis. Like that's where a lot of the fossil fuel extraction is taking place.
Right.
And, we could go on and on there. But at the same time, I started seeing all these studies about how the role of women was essential to positive changes. And a lot of countries, a lot of the best uh, environmental policies overall are conducted by women.
Yeah.
And so there was a clear relationship about women's leadership in the climate justice arena. And so I started the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network as a way to uplift this leadership, to support women's solutions on the ground. And it has been growing ever since. So I'm really excited about that. And of course, there's a lot of men who work in our organization as well. But
Right.
it's also like, how do we create balance? So we also focus on Indigenous and Black and Brown people to lift up that leadership because of the injustice of racial identity that we experience in our world right now. So, how do we lift up a lot of these voices that have been missing, whether it's women, whether it's uh, people who don't look like me from all over the world, whether it's nature itself? And like, how do we bring these voices back into the discourse, not just about climate, but about governance, about ethics? Because we really can't live in a way of harmony with nature or each other until everyone's at the table. And so this is part of the underpinnings, I would say, of how we got started.
Nice. I absolutely love it. You're speaking my language. 100%. Which is, especially as a white man, and whenever I like talk to students and folks like about the work I do, I'm pretty like a staunch eco-feminist in a lot of ways, and I attribute my wife especially for introducing me to certain thinkers like Val Plumwood and Karen Warren and some of these great eco-feminist thinkers. But it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, it's this is about all of us, and that this kind of framework is so crucial for addressing our issues. So yeah, also I do have to know a little bit more. How long did it take you to come up with such a great acronym? Because as somebody, I've tried to write some books and articles and tried to do some things, but We Can is such an amazing acronym. Was that just you coming up with it? Was it a collaborative thing? Was it just like you woke up from a dream and you're like, Women's Earth and Climate Action Network? What what was it? Because it's such a great name for an organization. I'm a sucker for a good acronym.
Oh, well, I think, um, it was a collective process. I mean, I did sort of, I don't want to take all the credit. I mean, I did eventually was the one who said it, but I think it was through a process of we started out with a different name originally, and then we had a
Oh,
big conference in New York in 2013, which is when we really kicked off Weekend, and we brought over 100 women leaders from all over the world um,
cool.
to discuss climate change. People from who were parliamentarians to grassroots leaders and lots of indigenous and Black women who have been leading this movement on the front lines for forever,
Right.
and heavily frontline impacted communities. And um, one of the things that I remember that was sort of formulated coming out of that space is how we don't want to just have climate isolated from the earth. That
Yeah.
conversation came up of like climate, yes, but it's also about the earth and really how do we get people connected to that? And so that's where this started to form into, well, we need to have earth also in the title. And so that's what got me going towards thinking about Earth and climate, and then it was, oh, look at these letters, and it was very, yeah. So that's how it came about.
Nice. I appreciate that because, the cynical side of me would be like, oh, you're just really good at branding. And and then the other side is like, that's such an important point, and it's something that I struggle with all the time, which is that climate's kind of abstract. And it's like, well, it's Earth. And even climate's different than weather, right? And climate's like a statistical average of weather patterns over time. It's like, that's too abstract. We got to remind people that it's about this thing that you're immersed in, that you are made of. And so, yeah, I always love bringing Earth back into the equation. And of course, it's not just me. It's everybody at the Forum on Religion Ecology has that kind of attitude. It's the living Earth community is what we're part of. So I like that that's how you came up with it, and also just jealous of a good acronym. That's a good one. Uh, and on that note, there was a thing we launched recently from the Forum on Religion Ecology. This new website just came out like a few months ago called Living Earth Community, where we're trying to draw people's attention to scientific ideas about sentience or intelligence or wisdom in everything from rocks to trees to animals, etc. But also ecological worldviews. And so your work couldn't be more relevant to what this project is about, but also to this idea of rights of nature. And I know you're on the executive committee for the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature. And so I wonder if you could speak a little bit about rights of nature, how you got into that work, because as somebody with like a philosophical background, I love law and governance and those kind of issues so much. And also, I'm not very smart about them because I study other things and but bump up against them all the time. And so curious about that because once you have the legal framework and the governance, then I feel like we can really make some change. So what's your work toward the rights of nature about?
Yeah, and I love that you're stringing all of these ideas together, and I think they're really connected. So maybe we'll back up a little bit. Um, and and then get into the practical aspects of the rights of nature work. Just if people, in case people don't know who are listening in, rights of nature is the jurisprudence framework in which we look at nature and we recognize nature as a rights-bearing entity. And right now, when we are talking about nature, because our current frameworks look at humans as the most important species at the top of the pyramid that doesn't exist, but we think it does.
Right.
Um, Nature doesn't have its own rights. It's like nature has to be owned by a human to be represented legally. And so this is a completely different view than like environmental law, which still sees humans as owners of property and the land and the rivers and the mountains and the forests. And so therefore environmental law is discerned and debated in a legal context in terms of a corporation or a person who owns that property and what could happen to it.
Right.
And this is completely different. It's not, technically environmental law as we think about it. Usually it's saying, no, that forest, that river, that mountain has rights of its own. And how do we represent those rights in a court of law to protect them in the same way that we view and uphold human rights? Like you don't have the right to go kill somebody. Well, we don't have a right to go kill that forest.
Right.
And so how do we represent in the court of law? So that's kind of the in a nutshell, sort of this different view um, that nature is not an object but a subject of law.
Right.
So backing up a little bit, to sort of your point about all these different ways that ethics and loving nature and seeing nature as alive, and then how does that relate to governance? That's what I really love about rights of nature because it does really comprehensively address the fact that those things are actually the same. So for me, how I got into this too is just like, what is our ontology as a culture? What's our personal ontology of who we are and how we are in the world?
Right.
And so I think, at the deepest level, rights of nature questions our worldview and our ontology of being and how we view ourselves or not in the modern society as part of the living, breathing, living ecosystem. And so, a lot of these views, of course, about nature being alive or our relationship to nature, we can look at indigenous peoples all over the world who have still maintained that view that nature is relative, that the forests are our relatives, that the water is our relatives, that we're all alive and every living, breathing thing is a sentient being.
Right.
And so then how do we create governance structures that reflect that?
Right.
And that is the question of rights of nature ultimately. So we can look at rights of nature both sort of as a cultural phenomena, which is like how do we actually change our worldview to reawaken a, um, a living cosmology, that we're all living in a living cosmology, and how do we modernize that and do that from whatever cultural backgrounds that we have. We all, I think it's always important to keep remembering that we do deal with our own identities and our cultural background. So we have to keep translating what that means to each and every one of us. It's not sort of all, one is the same. It
Right.
is, these differentialities and diversities where we can all honor the earth, but how do we do that?
Right.
Can be very specific. So how do we reclaim things in the past, but also build a new cultural perspective of a living cosmology that would then have a legal structure and governance structure that would care for the rivers and the forests and land.
Right.
And then there's the legal component and the legal um, forward motion on rights of nature and what does that actually mean. And so just to speak to the practical component in a moment is that it's first of all one of the fastest growing environmental movements in the world right now. I mean, it's really growing, and I'm super excited about this work. And right now, there's about 39 countries in the world who are either enacting rights of nature laws or looking at them and engaging with them in some capacity. And in 2008, Ecuador became the first country in the world to bring rights of nature at a constitutional level.
Right.
And that's really, quite a huge breakthrough. And since then, there's been many cases in Ecuador where an entire forest or river were protected using rights of nature legislation. And here in the United States, there's, I think like up to 3 dozen now cases that have been used at a local level, at a local ordinance level to protect, a town from some bad industry coming in or protecting a river and so, and if there's different cases all over the world that have been when there was one last year in Spain where an entire river was protected, arguing a rights of nature perspective. The Wanganui River in New Zealand has a sort of different form of rights of nature where the Wanganui River was recognized by New Zealand as a rights-bearing entity with personhood because the
Mm.
indigenous people there said this Wanganui River is our ancestor, our living ancestor. And
Right.
so now in New Zealand, you have this river with a indigenous custodian and someone from the government, the New Zealand government,
Hmm.
caring for the river in like a like co-stewardship of the river model. But again, the underlying law is that the river is an ancestor, the river is alive and has a right to thrive and grow and be healthy.
Mm.
Um, and so, yeah, it's amazing work. And I think what's exciting about it is it's like culture can push the law and law can push the culture
Mm.
to move towards this recognition that the earth is alive and has the right to be healthy and thrive, and that we need to have governance that protects and upholds that law on its own right, not within a human context.
Right. Beautifully said. And it's easy to get really pessimistic about the future of life on Earth when you just look at some of the data. And then there's stuff like this. There's like, uh-oh, he made me optimistic. And and it's like it's such a hopeful movement. And to know how widespread it is and how much it's growing is really hopeful. I also appreciate your point about the kind of reciprocity between the way culture can influence law and law can influence culture. I think that's extremely important because I think it still is the case after all these decades that when people think of environmental issues, they think of things like law and activism and science and technology and policy, but culture still does get left out, and I think people forget about that. Really appreciate that. I will ask a question. How do you think the cultural diversity changes the way that rights of nature are framed? Because of course, I mean, talking about like indigenous people in New Zealand, for instance, a lot of people don't necessarily have a concept of rights per se, but it is things like stewardship or custodianship and things like that. So, what are some of the ways that rights might look different in different cultural contexts?
Yeah, I think that I know a lot of the indigenous peoples that I have worked with also um, look at responsibilities,
Mm,
not rights, but responsibilities. And I
right.
really love that because uh, when I when I think about how, what I've learned a lot from indigenous peoples and also my own experience, I've lived in many different places on the land for many years, way out in the middle of nowhere, had many of these different experiences. This idea that many of us are talking about reciprocity, like what's our reciprocal
Mm,
relationship with the land, it's
right.
so deep. I think, for many of us who did not grow up in indigenous cultures or indigenous communities, and are, working very hard to get ourselves off of this extractive thinking or this hierarchical context in which humans are above nature. So it's a lifelong process
Yeah.
to learn about living in reciprocity and living with our relatives,
Mm,
meaning those more than human beings. Um, it's a big process to then shift into building a relationship with wherever we live, the lands that we live on, learning from indigenous peoples who have kept that knowledge and live in that worldview. So we respect, wherever we are and the indigenous peoples where we live. I think that's a really key component.
mhm,
Um, but also, going deeper and deeper into this reciprocity, meaning, responsibility. So
right.
wherever I live, am I doing things to help, in a practical way? If the river near me is polluted, am I actually active in helping have that river not be polluted anymore? If I'm living someplace where, there's deforestation, am I helping to protect that forest? Like,
Mhm,
how do we start translating reciprocity into actually truly caring for the land where we live? And this is why I was mentioning the word responsibility, like our responsibility to the earth that sustains us, to our relative, to our Mother Earth, um, can, of course, come in the form of thought and prayer and books and language and poems and celebrations and true responsibility also at a very practical level, like how do we care for the earth and what does the earth need from us and what
mhm,
is the earth calling for us to do emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually, politically, economically. So I think this is the stage many of us are coming to, like what there's the rights of nature, like these legal frameworks, which are essential, but also at a very personal level and at a community level, what's our responsibility to the land where we live and to indigenous knowledge keepers who can also help teach us about how to live wherever we live.
yeah. Yeah. I absolutely love that last sentence in particular is learn to live where we live because we don't know how. By and large, in like our industrial growth society, whatever, we don't live where we live, and we live through global supply chains and extractive, methods and things. And so, yeah, learn to live where we live is oddly a struggle. It sounds like it'd be the most obvious thing. Of course, we live where we live. We're not living where we live. And I really appreciate the language of responsibility and reciprocity. I think those are great ways of thinking about it, and then seeing how that folds into rights. That's yeah, so important. And again, you're making me feel optimistic. because it's in a way the hardest work that humans have ever had to deal with. We've never been in a situation of like a mass extinction event, global climate change. It's like the hardest time ever. And yet, when you see what people are doing to recover these relationships of responsibility and reciprocity with one another and with the land, it's like, I don't know. I think we're doing good. So so it's a tension I hold all the time. It really just depends on what mood I'm in when I wake up in the morning. Sometimes I'm just the most cynical person ever, and sometimes I'm the most optimistic person ever. One of the reasons I love doing the podcast is I get to talk to folks like yourself who basically cheer me up. So thanks so much for this work, and I'm it energizes me, but also. Gotta say, you're talking about some of this great organizing you're doing with the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, with the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature, and also you have this amazing book out, The Stories in Our Bones, How Worldviews and Climate Justice Can Remake a World in Crisis. Haven't have a copy. So it's one of those things I always appreciate when I already have a copy of somebody's book, and they happen to come on the podcast because it kind of means that you're sort of like a celebrity to me. Um, so let's chat about the book for a minute. But first, I will say, and I've told you this earlier, that the title made me angry. The Stories in Our Bones was such a good title that I was viscerally mad at it because it's just like, how have I not thought of something like this? It's an amazing title. So let's start with that. What is this book about? Why is that the title? I mean, I already complained about We Can as an amazing acronym. So you have some kind of knack for titles that makes me very jealous, but also very happy. I'm happy it's out there. To be clear, to anybody who's watching or listening, am mad in a happy way. It's a feeling I actually really enjoy. It's one of my favorite feelings is when somebody's doing stuff that's so good that I get like jealous about it. So the stories in our bones. What's going on?
Yeah, and thank you for your wonderful honesty and fun and play in that. Um, uh, well, and I also wanted just to comment before I go into the story and the title, because I think it kind of relates, which is, um, I also appreciate, your struggle getting up in the morning and how to like approach the day,
Yeah.
because I wouldn't for myself, I'm not speaking for you. I don't know if I don't wake up cynical, but I do obviously feel very excited, inspired by a lot of the work that I'm doing and the things that I do see, which we're talking about. But I also think it's important to say, like, I wake up in the morning also at times very angry, upset, and full of grief because of the times that we live in. So, I think it's part of the process, is all I wanted to say. It's like, in the United States of America right now, under the current siege of this administration and what we're facing, it's a really hard time, both in terms of destruction to the ecology and natural systems of the earth herself, and
Mhm.
that assault that we feel in our bodies. But, we are literally fighting for our democracy in the United States right now. And it's hard to wake up and not just be like, okay, everything's going to be okay. It's like, no, we're going to have to fight to have it be okay. And again, since we're bringing justice into this conversation, and we need to also look to our Indigenous Black and Brown family and neighbors in this country who are looking at white people and saying, look, we've been in this long time.
All
Welcome to
right.
the party. You're a little bit late. We've been screaming at you a long time about this.
Yeah.
This authoritarianism, this supremacy, this white supremacy, this racism, this treatment of of our colonial capitalistic structure. Here we are. And so yeah, I just wanted to bring that into the conversation to be like, if people are waking up in the morning having a hard time, I'm there. We're all struggling right now, and we need to unite together and recognize that, what has been festering underneath talking about where we live in the US, it's not new. It's how our systems have been built
Yeah.
for a very long time. Country built on stolen land and stolen labor
Right.
from indigenous and black people and brown people. This is all coming out, and it's really hard and it's really violent. And it's connected to our conversation because going back to the stories in our bones, I'll loop this back around. It's like I think we need to understand these lineages and origins of how we got here,
Mm.
at a bone deep level.
Mm.
This moment in our country didn't just come out of nowhere. It's
Right.
been building for a long time, and it's completely related to this conversation. And a lot of it to me is about these worldviews of supremacy, whether that it's supremacy over people who don't look white, whether it's supremacy of men over women, supremacy of thinking we're more important than nature.
Mhm.
All these views that are hierarchical have been incredibly destructive to the human adventure
Mm.
in the web of life. And we need to unpack that. And so for me, this is not the way I wanted this evolution of humanity to happen. It's violent. People are being harmed who are not having privilege. And those of us who think we have privilege don't have the same privileges, but still, we have to look at people who have been marginalized and othered for a very long time, including nature. And so all of this is coming out, and Earth herself is responding in, the form of climate change. The climate change is a result not of some abstract scientific fact. It's come out of our living condition and our views about nature and how we have modernized our world with an industrial revolution that nature's saying, I'm sorry, this doesn't work. You
Right.
guys are living way too top heavy. You are over consuming. You are polluting. Your industrial way of life is so destructive to nature that I'm going to respond with fires and droughts and floods and speak to you
Yeah.
to balance myself. And so this revolution, if you will, that's happening in the United States right now. When it's not just here, other countries are fighting huge right-wing governments as well.
Right.
This authoritarian supremacist ideology is because we're bursting at the seams to change.
Mm.
Things have to change and come back into equilibrium. And we are, in a process of very dangerous, violent forms of liberation.
Mm.
And it's really, really hard. Like I said, I wouldn't want it to have happened this way, but this is where we are. And so we need to also keep looking at the through line of where are we going?
Mm.
And where we're going, as from my perspective, is towards, how do we live with each other and the earth with reciprocity, respect, um, responsibilities, care, mutual aid, something
Mhm.
we all want. Those of
Mhm.
us who are not pushing for this other agenda. Um, you know, we all want healthy kids, healthy family, healthy nature, loving life, simplicity at some level,
Right.
and belonging. And so I think this is all part of the stories in our bones because for me, the story in our bones and the reason for the title is that within all of us, those of us who are not currently connected to when we did live close to the land and
Mhm.
our lineages and our ancestors were living on nature in reciprocal
Right.
relationships, even if we have to go back thousands of years.
Right.
That story is still in our bones. And while I really promote that we must respect Indigenous peoples, help them with their rights, support their language, their rights, the campaigns that they have, because they've been under such assault and attack and genocide, that it is our responsibility to lift up Indigenous people and learn from them as much as they want to share in a respectful way, to learn how to live on the land and learn different ways and views of a living cosmology. At the same time, I put that number one because that's the most urgent. But number two,
Mhm.
part of that process is also all of us digging deep into our own ancestries, the
Mm.
story in our bones about our own ancestors who live close to the land. And I call that our pre-patriarchal, pre-colonized ancestors,
Mm.
because we have to go back far enough to re-identify and reclaim those stories, those songs, those food traditions, those land practices. And that's not an easy journey because it's broken, it's been stolen, it has been, paved over, it has purposefully been denied and oppressed and erased.
Yeah.
And so I'm not talking about an easy process, but it's part of the healing journey we're on. And so part of my book is dealing with like, how do we get at this topic? And even if we have like one ancestral story or one food recipe that goes
Mhm.
way back, it ties us back in energetically and can open up huge doors to our understanding our lineage of when we connected to the land, which brings us into a circle of belonging that is quite different at an embodied level, not intellectually, but at a full body level. Oh, I'm at home on the earth. I belong here. I belong with all my relatives here. And until that happens, I think we're still going to be in the separation narrative, which is so dangerous. And to get out of that is a full bodied experience emotionally, mentally, physically, and spiritually. And so there's, many other things we could get into on this topic, but just to say that belonging is key to getting through this keyhole
Mm.
because, you know, anyone, psychologists will tell you, spiritual leaders will tell you that, if I as a human being or any of us don't feel we belong, eventually that sense of separation and being alone and not connected to community or to family or to nature eventually will move into some form of violence
Right.
and hierarchy and othering because of that desperate need to feel something and to fill that vacuum up, to feel like, well, if I'm better than that, whatever that other thing is, I'm something because I now have betterment than that.
Right.
And so this internal process of belonging and community and connecting at a bone deep level is part of the journey we're on. But it's important to know that story is already in us. It's already in us. That's essential because it can't be outside of us. We
Mm.
are the story.
That's really great. So thank you for that. Because I feel like you put into very clear language stuff that I try to think about all the time. But I don't think I could say it so in such a compelling and clear way. So I really appreciate that. I mean, a big influence for all the folks at the Forum on Religion and Ecology is Thomas Berry and the idea and his work with Brian Swim, who's my teacher at the California Institute of Integral Studies, and the universe story, and that the universe is the story. It's not just a story to tell about the universe. It's that the universe is this story. The story is embedded in all of the elementary particles in the universe. It's the atoms, it's the molecules, it's the stars, it's our bodies, it's our bones. And so connecting to that is, yeah, it's a lifelong practice. But yeah, you articulate that so well. And the point about belonging, I think, was just so well put. I forget who said it. There was somebody, I mean, it's probably a bunch of people, but I do recall somebody saying that we're in such a weird society, at least for people who are participating in like consumer societies, and where we have belongings, but we have no sense of belonging. And and to know that's like it's already there. That sense of belonging is already there. You just need to learn to tap back into it. And I also appreciate that food is part of that. The recipes are part of that. One of the funniest things ever, I have a friend who is asking her mom for like a kind of recipe. She's like, "Hey mom, do you have like an old recipe that like grandma gave you that, and because I want to make this traditional dish that's part of our culture, that's part of our like ethnic background." And her mom is just like, you could just Google that. And I was like, no, the whole thing is I want that transmission of these old recipes.
Exactly. Yeah.
On that note, gotta ask, is there a food practice for you, some kind of recipe or some kind of food or something that's helped you reconnect to that sense of belonging? And you don't have to give the whole recipe or anything.
Yeah, no, no, I'm not delving into any secret recipes here, but there
Yeah,
are some
exactly.
family recipes, yes. But maybe something. that there a practice that I do that might be helpful to others um, that I really love to do. It's very simple, and I don't do it every meal, but like, in the evening when I'm making my main meal, I have a special bowl that a friend of mine made. So it's like I know where that clay came from, and I know who made it, and then it was specifically given to me by this person
Mm,
who's a dear friend. And I take, like let's say I'm having a chicken stew or something, and I'll take like a little bit of chicken, a little bit of the celery, the potatoes, the corn, whatever, and put it in that bowl to thank the plants and animals
mm,
that I'm eating, and also the people who cared for the chicken and the people who grew the potatoes and the corn and the celery, and just take a minute and that moment of appreciation and thanksgiving. And it is a beautiful practice, and it's very simple, but it's really meaningful. And then after I have my meal, I'll go outside and give that away to the spirit of all those beings and thank them. And it's really has been one of those practices that, it's every day. I think you were mentioning earlier, like these daily practices.
mhm,
And some of those are, some of the most important, even though we might have these moments where we have, special ceremonies or special rituals at the of the different seasons or whatever people practice that are very important, these high moments that are also really important. It's beautiful to have things in the day, whether we meditate or what have you, to daily keep us connected to greeting the sun in the morning, or in this case, you know, having this respect for the food that we eat.
mm. I like that a lot. I think that's such a great practice. Yeah, I had or have, shouldn't say had. He's still a friend of mine. I have a friend who introduced me to a very similar practice. He always called it the spirit plate.
Hmm.
And that was, what he always did. And he's an interesting character. What may, but his whole thing was he studied with some indigenous folks in Latin America and was trained in certain shamanic practices, and that's kind of where he learned that. And that was one of those things that completely changed my worldview. And it's something so simple, right? Just putting a little food. It's so simple. I also appreciate your point, like that's not undercutting the really high holidays and those really important moments. But isn't that also the reason for those really important holidays is to remind us, do it every day. So we have Thanksgiving like once a year. That's a holiday. It's like, isn't that supposed to remind us that every day is Thanksgiving? And I think we always say that on Thanksgiving, and then by Black Friday, everybody forgets. And yeah, I love stuff like that because it's like it's so powerful, but it's so simple.
Hmm.
And I love the idea that a lot of the solutions to our crisis are, in fact, right in front of us, or even closer. They're in our bones, right? And that always makes me feel really good. It's like we don't have to like invent something new. It's right there. It's right there. So yeah, that's a very good practice. Um, All right. Well, I mean, I feel like I could bother you a bunch. I'll just ask a couple a couple more questions. And already I'm like, all right, you need to do another episode. We'll get you back on. We need to talk more. Uh, but absolutely just love your perspective and all the work you do. And I just want to hear more. So, along those lines, what is something you do in relationship to land, aside from food, but to land? That helps rejuvenate you, helps you feel that sense of belonging. And it could be anything. It could just be like, yeah, I like to take a hike or whatever. But I am curious because obviously, and I've said this on previous episodes of the podcast, I moved to a farm recently, and that is helping a lot of my own eco anxiety and climate anxiety and things like that. So being close to land, and that helps a lot. But I know not everybody gets to live on a farm necessarily. And even if you're on a farm, doesn't mean you necessarily feel connected. That's its own kind of issue. So I'm wondering, what are some things that you do regularly to help you feel that sense of belonging? The food one was great, but now asking more generally about land.
Yeah. Well, let me mention a couple of things. I kind of want to start from a different angle and work my way to something practical, perhaps for people that might be helpful. I don't know. I mean, everybody has um, their own backgrounds and what they feel comfortable with. Let's put it that way,
Right.
or or settles well in their very different textures and fabrics of belonging. But I want to kind of go back to some work that we're doing at Weekend. And why I mention this is because I think we're in a time where there's our own personal need to belong and connect to the land, and these practices are critical. I'm so glad that you brought it up to such a deep, everyday understanding of how we heal ourselves really and connect to the land. And that's essential. And I also want to kind of pull us to understanding that simultaneously, from my perspective, it's also not just about me and what's going to make me feel good or make me feel connected. That for me, the earth is also saying, hey, this is also part of belonging and part of being here in the gift of being alive on earth is reciprocal practice and
Mm.
responsibilities, as we talked about before. So I'm just going to give one example. One of the big programs that we have at the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, in addition to like we do a lot of policy work. We go to the UN climate talks every year. We bring a lot of frontline women leaders there so that they can advocate and speak for themselves about protection for their land. Um, we work at the highest levels of government. We meet with financial institutions to try to get banks to move their money out of destruction and into renewable energy, these sorts of things. So there's a lot of global work we're doing in many sectors to bring forward translating the ideas we're talking about here into policy, into governance, and into action on the ground, most especially to protect frontline communities, but
Hmm.
also to move towards what we call a just transition. How do we transition off of the destruction of the fossil fuel economy, extractive economies, um, injustices, human injustices, and move to a different system? So there's a lot going on there, but I just wanted to bring up one programmatic area, which is around our Women for Forest program. And we work in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We work in the Ecuadorian Amazon and the Brazilian Amazon. And we've been doing this for many years where we bring women in the community together and have a training around reforestation and forest protection. And of course, most of the women we work with, being Indigenous leaders, have a huge amount of traditional ecological knowledge about their forests.
Right.
It's a great marriage of a system that we figured out on how to fund and create knowledge around uh, forest programs and monitoring and all these things that you need so you can do
Right.
this work in a current context, which I won't go wonky into these details and how to create legal frameworks to protect that work. But, we've been doing this and reforesting in critical areas of the Amazon where certain trees are going extinct because of climate change or because of extractive practices and bringing back these trees, all done by incredible women on the ground who are coordinators in these areas. In the DR Congo, we've been doing that for over a decade to the point where certain areas, even the scientists that we're working with, have seen that they thought certain areas would take like 40 or 50 years to recover and be restored. Because we've planted so many trees, it's changing the biome and the weather patterns there where there's so much moisture. All these what we call wild nurseries are popping up that we're tending to. And it's just incredibly exciting to see, like, when we put energy into the earth, how much she will respond back, quadruply more than you ever thought. And so we're seeing this amazing comprehensive change in, empowering the women in their communities, making sure they have good livelihood, the forests getting renewed, and then the restoration to the climate, the restoration to the earth herself, and then ensuring that these women can be in political spaces where they can advocate for their land to protect the forests that are there. So, like in the DR Congo, we're protecting 1.6 million acres of old growth forest because 25% of the trees that we're growing are for human use. So people are no longer harming the old growth. And
Mm,
then 75% of the trees are to rewild the damaged areas that have been destroyed through
right.
destructive practices. I'm going through all of that just to give like an example of, I'm not saying everybody should be doing this. That's not my point. My
Right.
point is that, for me, the question became, what's my connection to the land? But also, what am I doing? What can our organization do to truly get into the nitty-gritty of restoration?
Yeah.
And how do we humans again become life-enhancing species? How are we walking to not be a destructive force on the earth, but actually contributing to healing the land, restoring the land, and being a species that is enhancing the land? And I love Lila June Johnson. Some of you might know
Mm,
her, who she's amazing. She's done a
yeah.
whole dissertation on this the indigenous peoples and how they have lived for millennium in these reciprocity practices with the land, which
Right.
some people might just seem like, oh, you're in prayer with the land and you're respecting the land's relatives. I mean, it goes far beyond that to like where you harvest, where you do um, uh, um, planned burns so that the area as a forest is burned in a way that helps bring back different species and helps the animals also have a place to feed better, and on and on and on and on. These
Yeah.
ways that you actually live the land that generates life, that we are now part of the enhanced web of life and contributing to biodiversity and the health of the places we live. And so to me, like that's the biggest land practice I can think of. So I
Yeah.
just wanted to bring that forward. And then within that context, it is like, how do we actually personally connect to the land? But I
Right.
think we have to also advocate for this positionality of also understanding what's our role right now. And that transformation, I think, is equally important.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Really well said. You weave the kind of personal and political together so wonderfully. So yeah, yeah, it's music to my ears. And also, yeah, thanks for the shout out to Lila Ju Johnson. She's absolutely incredible. And also the fact that she does all that work, but also is like a musician, a singer, and stuff. Like, all right, well, we're bringing the arts in because that's one of those things that helps move people. And so, again, we're talking about social and political systems. We're also talking about the arts. We're talking about our personal psychology. It's like all these things just weaving together. And all for the simple transition from humans being a destructive presence on the planet to becoming a mutually enhancing presence on the planet. It's like the simplest but also the most complicated. But it's really heartening to hear all the positive work you're doing, especially that thing of like people are like it's gonna take X number of years for this forest to recover, and you're like it can recover faster with our love and our responsibility, our respect, our reciprocity. Like I think we often underestimate the regenerative capacities of the planet, and then when you see it happening, you're like I think we can fix this quicker than we realize. Which obviously doesn't mean next year we're gonna be like climate crisis solved. It's like it's gonna take time, obviously, but it's so heartening to see those regenerative capacities of the planet coming back. So I appreciate that a lot. Also, I mean, a handful of things. You're saying so many great things. It's too many things. I need to emphasize like all of them. I just want to like underline everything you said for anybody who's watching or listening. So I'll just repeat it. But just transitions, huge, right? Because so many times people talk about transitioning to a sustainable economy and they forget like what if that transition isn't just? And so just transition is really important. Also, I appreciate you talking about extractivism. It's a handful of times you brought that up. And I think so many folks were really optimistic that to solve like a lot of our environmental crises, especially climate change, just we can just pull fossil fuel out from under us and slip in solar and wind and stuff like that. And it's like, but even solar and wind, if we have an extractive paradigm, Like, where are you getting all the lithium for the batteries that are going to hold? And so it's like, no, extractivism was the problem. Yes, fossil fuels are a problem, obviously. So I'm not trying to take away from that. But anyway, I feel like it's a gradual thing where people are starting to realize it's the extractive paradigm that's really killing us because we could easily destroy our planet with solar if we do it wrong, and or maybe save a large swath of life on Earth. But if you look at where a lot of the lithium is being extracted, they're primarily indigenous communities, and of course, it's women who are the most vulnerable in those communities. And so, yeah, so just all I'm doing is basically repeating things you said. Uh, but I appreciate it so much because I feel like that's the cutting edge of where we need to be. Which, of course, in terms of somebody like Lila June Johnston, the cutting edge is 5,000-year-old technology. And so it's like the newest thing is the oldest thing. So it's exciting and just exciting to have folks who are doing this kind of work. So again, I have to say it. I like everything you say so much that it kind of makes me mad. Uh, which is to say, honestly, to be more honest about it, what it means is it just energizes me to do the work. And that's what it is. And it's a weird feeling where I'm like, all right, let's go. We
Mhm.
got this. And it's just really exciting. And so I knew I was gonna have a good time talking to you. Didn't know I'd have this much fun. And so yeah, it's just been such a joy. Gotta ask, what's next? You got something else you're working on? Like, this episode will come out basically like early February, like next week. Like I'll process this, put it up, it'll be out soon. So it's early February 2026. What do you got going on for you right now? Because it sounds like you got a lot of irons in the fire. So
Yeah.
what's a new thing or two or three, what's next on the horizon?
All right. Well, first of all, I've had a great time talking to you as well. Thank you for your great questions and the way that you think. It's a really great conversation. So we're together. We're together here. It's like mutual admiration going on. Um, so um, February. Okay, so a couple of things people might be interested in. You know, I'll just hone it down to things that might be immediately interesting. In April of this year, um, governments that are really ready to go forward on a fossil fuel phase out, which governments collectively have not been. Anyone who follows the UN climate talks knows at the end of the last year that fossil fuels were not on the agenda, the phase out, and that's a whole story. But what has been brewing for a while and now is coming into manifestation is that there are a group of countries who have dedicated themselves to getting off of fossil fuels and want to create a different multilateral process because in many ways, the UN climate talks have been really compromised in many ways by the fossil fuel industry itself and fossil fuel rich countries and the wealthy elite, to
Right.
put it in short terms. So, this conference is going to go on in Colombia at the end of April, where countries are coming together to actually talk about a fossil fuel phase out that is just, which is really fabulous. So we're at WeCan, we're also on the committee of something called the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty,
Mm,
which has really helped seed this idea, but governments need to lead out. And so that's what will be happening. But what everyone can be invited to is on March 31st. It's on our website at www.wecaninternational.org. Um, we're hosting a free online assembly of leaders, women leaders from around the world who are going to be one, parliamentarians and policymakers talking about this conference to phase out fossil fuels. There'll be another panel on frontline women leaders, what's happening on the front lines of the climate crisis and fossil fuel extraction. And then a third panel on the just transition. What does it look like to address everything I think that you said so eloquently about, it's not just about, oh, let's go to renewables. And then we just keep polluting and overconsuming and not addressing our internal problems and all of the things that we've been discussing
yeah.
for the last hour. Like, what does this mean? And so it'll be a panel on the just transition. So we're super excited, and people are welcome to join that. We've got a lot of other things going for sure with our forest work, and we also have a just transition program and all kinds of things going on there. But I think that that's the first thing that comes to mind because it'll be, right after this episode comes out, March 31st. Um, I'm continuing my book tour from the book that you mentioned, and doing a lot of speaking engagements around my book. And this is the first time I'm saying it publicly, is I'm actually starting to work on another book, which I'm really excited about.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, so those are like things that are coming up. And to kind of go back to your other question about land practices, I think in all of this, I do work at least, besides just going outside every day and do my own greetings to the day, I do um hike. Hike is such a funny word. Walk in
Right.
nature,
Right.
commune with the land, um, at least once a week for a good length of time in the hills around where I live, where there are redwoods and different madrones and beautiful trees. And I do think we need to do that. Sort of like we wouldn't go, a day or two without probably taking a shower because that's part of our human self hygiene. I consider it like my spiritual hygiene well-being to listen to the land. Go out there and listen to the trees and listen to the birds and tune in. I think that that's really important. So yeah, that's what I would
Nice.
mention.
Nice. Love it. Absolutely love it. All right. Well, I could keep you for several more hours. But I think we can go ahead and call it quits for now. It was an amazing conversation. Got to have you back, and so excited to hear more about your perspective. For now, we'll go ahead and kind of say goodbye. Here's how I'd like to end things. It's kind of mean in a way. I like to give you the last word, but that means one word or one phrase. And then that will be the end of the episode. And I realize, especially talking to the kind of folks who write books, asking people for one word or one phrase is impossible. They're like, by a phrase, you mean a paragraph, right? And honestly, that's okay. Sometimes the phrase does turn into like some kind of run-on sentence. So that's okay. Not mad at that. But so great to talk to you. Osprey, Oriole Lake. Everybody check out the book, The Stories in Our Bones, and check out We Can. Look at the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature. Amazing stuff. So, Osprey, give us one word or a phrase or a run-on sentence. That's okay. Uh, it could be anything, but that will be the way we close out the episode.
Let's see. You were completely spot on. Like for me, that is always really challenging.
Yeah, it's the
Uh,
worst thing.
it is. It's
Yeah. I feel
fair
like
enough.
nobody's ever given me one word because it's
I'll,
always
I'll,
like
I'll
writers
try.
and stuff
I'll,
like
I'll try one word just because that's a challenge for me because it is true. Let me just see which word would I choose. Uh, what would be a really good word? I think, to kind of summarize our moment in time.
that.
I guess it's two words. Be brave.
Mm.
Be brave.